Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's VRC video series. Every week we'll be bringing you 3 important tests for VRC, important questions that you must solve regularly so that you can ace VRC section. VRC section is one of those sections where consistent practice is extremely important. You see the gains after a few months. There is no immediate improvement in VRC. So in such cases, you have to put in efforts regularly for months on end before you see any improvement. With that thought in mind, what we have decided is that we will give you regular tests, 3 a week, which you can solve along with us. We'll also give you a PDF of the question so you can actually try attempting the set by yourself and then solve it along with us. So look at the PDF, download it, try to solve the RC or the VA questions, then see the video. Do this consistently. These are only 3 tests a week, so it is extremely doable. But do this consistently and slowly over time you will see yourself improving. So I hope to see you come in every single week and solve these 3 tests. If you need more VRC practice tests, just search for Cracku VRC sets and you will get a lot more tests like these. Keep solving, keep practicing and keep getting better. I hope to see all of you completely crack the VRC section in CAT 2026.
Hi friends, welcome to Cracku's video series. I'm Sayali Ma'am. In this particular reading comprehension passage, we have a passage about how engineering should not just look at engineering problems objectively, but also should consider the social implications of what they are trying to build. So let's take a look at the passage. We'll go paragraph by paragraph and then take a look at the questions. When we teach engineering problems now, we ask students to come to a single best solution defined by technical ideals like low cost, speed to build and ability to scale. This way of teaching primes students to believe that their decision making is purely objective, as it is grounded in math and science. This is known as technical social dualism, the idea that technical and social dimensions of engineering problems are readily separable and remain distinct throughout the problem definition and solution process. So essentially what is being described over here, the way we currently teach engineering or how to solve engineering problems is that we should only look at the technical aspects, only look at the mathematical and objective aspects, and we should leave all social aspects out of it, as if those social aspects are essentially extraneous to the technical solution as such. So the current way of solving engineering problems leave out social aspects and this is essentially called as the technical social dualism. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. Non-technical parameters such as access to a technology, cultural relevancy or potential harms are deemed political and invalid in this way of learning. But those technical ideals are at their core social and political choices determined by a dominant culture focused on economic growth for the most privileged segments of society. By choosing to downplay public welfare as a critical parameter for engineering design, we risk creating a culture of disengagement from societal concerns amongst engineers that is antithetical to the ethical code of engineering. So basically when you say that, okay, you should look at the social aspects, you should look at the cultural relevancy, you should look at all of these aspects, they are basically told that no, these aspects are political and they are not within the domain of engineering concern. These are not engineering issues and we should not look at the social aspects of the engineering problems that we are trying to solve, because once we try to do that, we are basically getting involved in politics and you don't want to do that. But the author is arguing that that is not right, because when we don't look at those social aspects, we don't look at the social impact, we are essentially providing solutions that help the dominant culture, that provide solutions for the dominant, like essentially those who are in power as such. They define what the problem is and the solution essentially works for them as such. And you are by disengaging from the social impact, the social aspect of the engineering problem, you are essentially doing a disservice to your own engineering code of ethics as such, what your ethical code of engineering should be. So essentially the author is arguing that by not looking at social aspects of engineering, you are helping dominant culture and dominant class against ethical code of engineering. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. In my field of medical devices, ignoring social dimensions has real consequences. Most FDA-approved drugs are incorrectly dosed for people assigned female at birth, leading to an unexpected adverse reactions. This is because they have been inadequately represented in clinical trials. So the author says that ignoring the social aspects or ignoring social dimensions of problems has a real impact. If you ignore the social dimensions of medical devices, what happens is that you have solved it using incorrect ideas and incorrect ideals, and basically the result is that you have adverse reactions for a certain section of underrepresented section of society as such. So essentially adverse impact of not considering social dimensions. An example is given. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. Beyond physical failings, subjective beliefs treated as facts by those in decision-making roles can encode social inequities. For example, spirometers, routinely used devices that measure lung capacity, still have correction factors that automatically assume smaller lung capacity in Black and Asian individuals. These racially based adjustments are derived from research done by eugenicists who thought these racial differences were biologically determined and who considered non-white people as inferior. These machines ignore the influence of social and environmental factors on lung capacity. So essentially the author is saying that many of the times when you're solving for, even when you're solving engineering problems, many of the time what you assume as facts are not facts, they are subjective beliefs. And she gives the example of spirometers. So when you are using spirometers, while you're using the spirometer, they are trying to measure your lung capacity. So when you are measuring lung capacity, there are corrections for specific races of people. Now, where did these corrections come from? So when they are making the spirometer, they assume that these corrections are fact, but they are not facts essentially. Those corrections were made by eugenicists. So eugenicists are a kind of a discredited form of discredited scientists, basically nearly like at the time of like at the height of eugenicism was in Nazi Germany types, where they used to believe that the Aryans were inferior, Aryans were the superior race, the other races were inferior, and they essentially that was a pseudo form of science which essentially believed that different races were inferior, and those guys essentially developed those corrections. Their subjective beliefs developed those corrections, and you're still using them to date. And those essentially you don't like question where those numbers or those corrections came from, and essentially you use things as facts when in fact they are not facts as such. So this example essentially establishes how in many cases engineering problems use facts and rely on things as facts which are actually subjective beliefs as such. So in this would basically these machines ignore the influence of social and environmental factors on lung capacity. So basically for even when you are when people ignore the subjective beliefs, when beyond just like the physical failings, essentially relying on only on engineering, ignoring social factors essentially makes you assume or consider subjective beliefs as facts as such. Subjective beliefs can be confused with facts. And an example of this is given. So essentially what you are saying is that this is objective engineering. It's not objective engineering, because many of the factors or information that is going into your objective model is in fact subjective in nature, is in fact at times can be racist. So you might think that you are doing objective engineering by building the spirometer and using the spirometer to measure lung capacity, but what you don't know is one of the factors or inputs going into the model is a subjective belief of like racist scientists, and which is not based in like proper science as such. So that is what is the point of this paragraph. Now let's take a look at the next paragraph. Many technologies for systematically marginalized people have not been built because they were not deemed important, such as better early diagnostics and treatment for diseases like endometriosis, a disease that afflicts 10% of people with uteruses. And we hardly question whether devices are built sustainably, which has led to a crisis of medical waste and healthcare, accounting for 10% of US greenhouse gas emissions. So essentially, the author is saying that certain medical devices were not built not because they were not needed, but because they were needed by people that were not considered important or whose needs were not considered important. So essentially, medical devices that were needed but not built because they were needed by an underrepresented or a marginalized section of people, but not built because needed by a marginalized section. So essentially, women who needed these devices to check for endometriosis did not get those devices in time because the needs of women who are suffering from endometriosis was not considered important. So even though this medical device is extremely important, it would improve the lives of many women, because the needs of women were not considered important, those medical devices were never made. So again, the author is mentioning how a social factor influenced how engineering actually did things. So the author is essentially debunking this whole idea that engineering is objective, etc. The author is saying, by giving several cases, how engineering at the moment essentially enforces the dominant culture's view, the dominant culture's needs, and solves for the dominant culture's needs as such. So basically, when you say that when you are being objective in engineering, the author is saying, no, you're not being objective in engineering, you're ignoring the needs of those who are underrepresented. And also basically in this she also mentions how sustainability was never considered a factor while building medical devices. And the impact of that was that it accounts for like 10% of the greenhouse gases as such. Social justice must be made core to the way engineers are trained. Some universities are working on this. Engineers taught this way will be prepared to think critically about what problems we choose to solve, how we do so responsibly, and how we build teams that challenge our ways of thinking. So basically, the author is giving the solution for this, that you should actually incorporate social justice in the way engineers are trained, and then some universities are doing that, and how those engineers would think in a more fair and balanced way as such. So social justice should be incorporated Individual engineering professors are also working to embed societal needs in their pedagogy. Darshan Karwat at the University of Arizona developed activist engineering to challenge engineers to acknowledge their full moral and social responsibility through practical self-reflection. Khalid Qadir at the University of California, Berkeley created the popular course Engineering, Environment and Society that teaches engineers how to engage in place-based knowledge, an understanding of the people, context and history to design better technical approaches in collaboration with communities. When we design and build with equity and justice in mind, we craft better solutions that respond to the complexities of entrenched systemic problems. So here she gives other examples of how people are trying to correct for these issues, how they are trying to balance and incorporate social needs into engineering as such. Other positive examples of people incorporating social needs into engineering training as such. Incorporating social needs in engineering education. So the author through the passage is trying to communicate how it is the engineer's role to not just look at a technical problem as only a technical problem, but also look at the social aspects of the technical problem. Because when you don't look at it, what you're essentially doing is that you are solving for the needs of the dominant culture, you're solving for the needs of like cost and efficiency without looking at the sustainability, without looking at the impact on the underrepresented majorities. You're considering as fact or what might be a subjective belief. You are not considering the needs whose needs might not be underrepresented in society. So all of these essentially are essential social factors that an engineer should consider because it is in their ethical code of engineering as such. And then she gives positive examples of universities which are trying to correct, professors which are trying to correct and move in a positive direction. So the author is trying to highlight the need for better social justice being incorporated in the education for engineering, social concerns to be part of engineering problem solving as such. That is what she is advocating for through the passage. So now that we understand what is the purpose behind writing this passage, we can answer the questions. So let us take a look at the first question. So the first question is, we can infer that the author would approve of a more evolved engineering pedagogy that includes all of the following except make considerations of environmental sustainability intrinsic to the development of technological solutions. This is something that she actually mentions. She mentions that we never considered the sustainability of medical devices that we made, and that has led to the catastrophe of production of greenhouse gases. They contribute to 10% of greenhouse gases as such. So this is something that she would definitely want to include. So we can eliminate that. A more responsible approach to technical design and problem solving than focus of speed in developing and bringing to scale. So she mentions this in first, that when we are finding the best solution, we are thinking of low cost, speed to build, ability to scale. And what do we not consider? Social impact. So she wants a more responsible approach which considers other social objectives rather than just these things as such. So she is going to want to include this in her engineering pedagogy. Design that is based on the needs of communities using local knowledge and responding to local priorities. This is also something that she mentions. She mentions that access to non-technical parameters like access to technology, cultural relevancy, potential harms are considered politically invalid. You don't consider what is needed by the local this as such. All of that is mentioned in the passage as such. So basically the author says that you have to respond to the cultural requirements, the cultural relevance of what you are building, the local requirements as such. So this is something that she would actually accept and approve of in the evolved engineering pedagogy. So we can eliminate this. Moving towards technical social dualism, where social community needs are incorporated in problem definition and solutions. This part is true, she would agree with this, but this part, moving towards technical social dualism, is wrong. Technical social dualism is an idea she is explicitly against. So what is technical social dualism? It is the idea that the technical and social dimensions of engineering problems are readily separable and remain distinct through the problem definition and solution process. So the idea is that these are two different things, let's not mix them. But she is against that idea. In fact, she believes that social factors should be considered in along with technical factors while developing engineering solutions. So she is against this idea of technical social dualism. So she is not going to say move towards this idea. That is definitely not something that she is going to mention. So this is not something that she would include. So D would be the right answer. Let's take a look at the second question. All of the following are examples of the negative outcomes of focusing on technical ideals in the medical sphere, except neglect of research and development of medical technologies for the diagnosis and treatment of diseases that typically afflict marginalized communities. This is given in the case of endometriosis of women. Medical devices were never made for that because those needs were never considered important. So this is something that was given as a negative outcome of only focusing on technical ideals, because those technical ideals were driven by the dominant culture, the dominant this, and the dominant needs of the men who were dominating. So their needs were answered. The technical technical field essentially wanted to address the needs of the dominant culture, which is males, and therefore no medical devices were essentially made for women who are suffering from endometriosis. So this is given as an example, so we can eliminate this. All of the following are except this, so this is an example, so we can eliminate it. Option B is continuing calibration of medical devices based on past racial biases that have remained unadjusted for changes. This is based on the example of the spirometer, that what you're relying on as fact are basically racially biased readings of eugenesis. So this is you continue to calibrate lung capacity using those figures that were given by eugenesis. So this is also given as a example in the passage. Exclusion of non-privileged groups in clinical trials, which leads to incorrect drug dosages. This is given for women who are assigned female at birth. They were underrepresented in clinical trials, and because they are underrepresented in clinical trials, their dosage is not correctly determined, leading to more adverse outcomes. This is also given in the passage, so can be eliminated. Incorrect assignment of people as female at birth, which has resulted in 40 drug interventions. No, the assignment of people at female at birth was not the problem. Women who were assigned as female of birth had more adverse outcomes because their dosage was incorrect, because there were not enough people who were assigned female at birth in the clinical trials. The problem was the fact that there was underrepresentation in clinical trials, not that they were incorrectly assigned female at birth. This is incorrect. This is the assignment was correct, okay, the assignment of female at birth was correct, but because they were underrepresented in the clinical trials, they had faulty drug dosages. So this is what is not given as an example. So option D is the right answer. Now let's take a look at the third question. In this passage, the author is making the claim that the objective of best solutions in engineering has shifted the focus of pedagogy from humanism and social obligations to technological perfection. So basically, the author is saying that the focus has not shifted, but it was always on technological perfection as such, that has been always the dominant concern, and social obligations were never a concern as such. So it's not as if the focus has shifted. The pedagogy's focus has shifted from A to B is not true at all. So this is not a claim that the author is making. Engineering students today are taught to focus on objective technical outcomes independent of social dimension of their work. This is true. The author says that they are told that, okay, this is what you have to focus on. They are primed to believe that decision making is purely objective, grounded in maths and science, that social objectives should not be considered. They are not part of the engineering problem. That is what they are taught, and this is true. This is a claim made in the passage, so I'd say this is the right answer. Engineering students today are trained to be non-subjective in their reasoning, as this best enables them to develop much needed universal solutions. Non-subjective in their reasoning is true, but this is not the reason why, that this best enables them to develop much needed universal solutions. This is not the reason why that they are trained to be objective. They are trained to be objective because they believe that being objective is what an engineer should do. The engineer should not look at social problems, because doing that would be getting involved in politics, and your job as an engineer is not to get involved in politics. That is the reason why they are trained to be objective in their outlook, and not because they want to build best universal solutions. That is not the aim at all. So C is also incorrect. Technical social dualism has emerged as a technique for engineering students to incorporate social considerations into their technical problem solving process. Technical social dualism has emerged, but this is the opposite of actually incorporating social considerations. Technical social dualism is essentially keeping out social considerations, not incorporating. So D is clearly incorrect. It is opposite of what is given in the passage, so can be eliminated. B is the right answer. Let's take a look at the fourth question. The author gives all of the following reasons for why marginalized people are systematically discriminated against in technology related interventions, except but those technical ideals are at their core social and political choices determined by a dominant culture focused on economic growth for the most privileged segments of the society. So this is basically what the author says, that when you say that, okay, we have to optimize for cost, we have to optimize for speed of building or scalability, you're essentially considering only the needs and concerns of the dominant culture. This has been given a way of essentially discriminating against the marginalized society. So this is true. This is you focus on the needs of the dominant culture and ignore the needs of the marginalized sections of society. So this is one of the examples or reasons that is given. And we hardly question whether devices are built sustainably, which has led to a crisis of medical waste and healthcare, accounting for 10% of US greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this is given as a criticism of how social factors were not considered in engineering development, but this is not about social inequality. This is just about the fact that the methods are not sustainable, and they are not sustainable for everybody, like for the poor, for the rich, for the marginalized, for the dominant, for everybody it is bad. So it's not a way in which the marginalized are affected and the dominant culture is not affected. This is not one of those cases. Here everybody is adversely affected. So this is not an example of why of discrimination as such. So I would say this is the right answer. Here everybody is affected because like greenhouse gases affect everybody. As it's not just like something that is socially unequal. It is not something that is done to discriminate against or that causes discrimination against the marginalized people. So B would be the answer as such. But let's take a look at option C and D as well. These racially based adjustments are derived from research done by eugenicists who thought these racial differences were biologically determined and who consider non-white people as inferior. This was a form, or this was an example given to show how Asians and black people were discriminated against in how their lung capacity was measured by medical devices. So this is a reason that was given to show that marginalized people are systematically discriminated against in technology related interventions. So this is an example given, so we can eliminate it. Beyond physical failings, subjective beliefs treated as facts by those decision-making roles can encode social inequalities. This is given as an example just before this, where the spirometers example is given. So this is also shown how people believe as facts, what people believe as facts might be subjective biases, especially against marginalized communities. So this is also given as a reason why you should, just technology related interventions which do not consider social factors are actually systematically discriminate against marginalized people. So D is also one of the reasons given. B is the only one which is not related to discrimination. It is instead related to sustainability, and that is not related to social inequality or discrimination as such. So B is the right answer.
The best way to start your CAT prep is with a high quality mock, and the best price for that is free. At Cracku, you get 3 CAT mocks absolutely free. And this isn't just a trial. It's a full-length mocks crafted by 5-time 100 percentiler Maruti sir himself to give you real exam experience. You get a detailed analysis of your performance and a video solution for every question. Ready to test yourself? Go to Google and just search Cracku CAT mock test.